Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast is number 1484. The topic is Q&A, and the title is How Your Body Type Affects Your Nutrition and Training. So this is a fun one. This was brought up by a listener. They actually wrote, good morning from Japan. So that's awesome. Thank you for listening from there. Long-time listener, first-time writer. That's a very funny reference. Just want to say I listen to the podcast all the time when I work out, and it's very motivating to hear you speak about nutrition in proper form and everything. So thank you. Thank you very much. My question is, do you believe in the three body types? And what they're referencing is ectomorph, mesomorph, and endomorph. And the ectomorph would be somebody who is considered very like a slight build. They don't have a very thick bone frame. They're not very wide in the shoulders. They are relatively lean all the time, even if they eat a bunch of junk. And they have a hard time kind of gaining muscle. They have muscularity to them because they're so lean, but they have a hard time getting big. So that's an ectomorph. Ecto kind of to me sounds like a skeleton, so that's how I remember it's the skinny one. Mesomorph is the people we all hate. They are somehow lean and muscular, and it seems to come very natural for them. They're natural athletes. They're good at everything. We hate them. Then endomorphs, that is the people who are a little thick. So they have a wider, thicker frame. They have good muscularity to them, but they also typically have higher degree of body fat. So they'll have a harder time kind of losing body fat. They'll have a hard time gaining weight, as in muscle and fat, but they have a hard time taking just the fat back off, leaving the muscle on. So that's ecto, meso, and endomorph. He continues, and if you do, so I'll come back and answer that question. If you do, as an ectomorph myself, I'm a hard gainer. What do you suggest when I go to the gym when it comes to reps and sets for bulking, as well as isolation versus compound movements? So isolation movements are where you're trying to target just one muscle. Think of a bicep curl. Whereas a compound movement is multiple muscles are involved. Think of a pull-up. A pull-up, you're using your biceps plus your back plus your grip, your forearm, a lot of other things. So isolation is isolated to one muscle. Compound is many muscles. So he says, currently I do 5 workouts a week. I spend no more than an hour and a half max at the gym. I usually do 5 to 6 exercises between 3 to 5 sets of 10 to 12 reps. Okay, so a lot of good stuff in here. Do I believe in the three body types? It's interesting in the sense to where when you look into that type of research and content, they say that okay, there's ecto, meso, and endo morphs, but somebody might be ecto meso, somebody might be meso endo, and they usually say there's this space in between of the things, and it's really just kind of like a spectrum. There's not individual categories. It's just people. If you line up 100 people, you tend to see these ones are kind of skinnier. You could lump them into an ectomorph category. These ones are muscular. They're mesomorph. These ones are a little bit thicker. We'll put them in endomorph. What about these ones that we don't really know? I don't know. We'll put them somewhere in the middle. So it's kind of just like a spectrum from skinny to thick. And I used to laugh when I was learning this stuff in school. I felt like I was an ecto-endomorph, which means I was skinny fat, which isn't technically supposed to exist. But I don't know. I feel like that was kind of me. So I was skinny when I was in high school. I was about 165 pounds, and you could grab fat rolls around my midsection. I never took my shirt off for anything. Only my doctor ever saw me with my shirt off. I did not like the way I looked. So I was very thin at 165 pounds, at 6 foot tall, very thin, but I was also very fat. I had fat rolls on me. There was no muscle tone. You couldn't even see a vein in anywhere in my body. So I felt like a definite ecto-endomorph. Now, as I've gotten bigger and over the years, now I'm 283 and I can see my abs, so I actually am leaner at 283 than I ever was at 165. I definitely fall more into the endomorph category, so I've kind of grown out of the ecto, and I can put on weight. So I could weigh over 300 pounds if I actually started eating more. I just don't like to eat. So I have been fortunate to push towards this, but the challenging part is taking off body fat without losing muscle. So typically anytime I've done diets in the past, I have a very hard time not having my muscle mass drop off about as fast as my fat does. So I have to be very careful in the way I diet. So it's interesting in the sense, and I bring up all that to say, is I don't believe that whatever you are now, that you're stuck. I believe you can change. If you don't know who this person is, his name is Stan Efferding. So Stan, S-T-A-N. Efferding is E-F-F-E-R-D-I-N-G. Stan Efferding. He's pretty famous in like powerlifting world. If you check him out, and somewhere on his website or in his social media, I'm sure, you can see back when he was in college, he played soccer and he was ridiculously thin, rail thin. Now he is set world records in powerlifting. He's a professional bodybuilder, and he is anything but thin. So he's somebody that you can see, like we all could look up right now and see like the transition he's gone through to where he went from ectomorph to a mesomorph. He's never really been fat. Even when he did powerlifting, you could see his abs sticking out through his shirt when he would squat. So he never kind of transitioned all the way to an endomorph, but he absolutely went from ecto to meso. So whatever, if you believe in the categories, whatever category you think you're in now, you're absolutely not stuck. If you don't believe in the categories and it's like, well, it's just a way to describe people, but it's not like people are made into each category, then that can be fairly accurate as well. So, but the main point I want to get across is, sometimes when people believe in these categories, and I've had people tell me this, like, oh, I'm an ectomorph and I can never gain weight no matter what I do. And then I look and see, and they're eating like a jackass. They're eating randomly here and there, and then their training is sporadic. Now, this is definitely not you, listener. So, but I'll sometimes have people say, I'm X, therefore I'm screwed, and then they never really put full effort into changing it. So if you do believe in it, don't believe in it to be a curse, okay? You can definitely change. Now, when they go to talking about the questions of what should they do for sets and reps and all that stuff, let's go through. Let's answer that. So a good reference point for us all to start from would be podcast number 1437. So if you haven't listened to that, please go check it out. You can go to our website, www.brutalirongym.com. You can access the podcast and all the old podcasts there. So the podcast number 1437 is a training podcast titled Programming for Greatest Muscle Growth. And in that one, I go through and I talk about frequency of body parts, working sets of body parts per week, what your rep range should be, like how intense you have to push each working set, and then considerations for compound versus isolation. So that's a great reference point. I'm going to go through a little bit of stuff kind of quicker because I want to talk about stuff on top of that. But if there's anything I mention that you're like, oh, I want to go learn a little bit more about that, podcast 1437 would be the place to go. So our website, also, I'm in the process right now of writing training programming, like educational programming, which will give formats of workouts for people to follow. And it's actually like a template where you can put in your own exercises based on your own ability and your own equipment and your own schedule. I'm in the process of writing that. I haven't written the one for this category yet, but I should be able to have that finished by maybe the end of next week. So check out our website. I have been updating it. I'm putting new content on there, free programs. I really want to start to build that up because we've had a lot of people going to it, but I haven't really had a lot of great stuff there. So the business has been growing really well, and I want to start giving even more back than just the podcast. So I want to start putting more content on there. But podcast 1437 on the website, go check that out. Generally, if you're wanting for the greatest muscle growth, you should train the body parts that you want to grow the most twice a week. The body parts that you feel like, okay, they're okay, I would train them once a week. So let's say, for example, somebody has really thick legs, but they feel like their upper body is lagging behind their legs. You would train your legs once a week, you'd train your upper body twice a week. Maybe you're the other way around. You have a bigger upper body, but you haven't really been able to develop your legs really well. You would train your legs twice a week and your upper body once a week. Maybe you have really good arms, but you have you don't have a very good chest. So you would train your arms once a week, your chest twice a week. So that would be kind of the frequency that you would want to break it down. Now, whether you're ectomorph, mesomorph, or endomorph, that shouldn't change. The frequency would be the same because muscle tissue is muscle tissue, and it's not really going to have much of a difference in regards to frequency regarding body type. So if you want a certain muscle to catch up to the rest of your body balance-wise, you want to train that one twice and train everything else once. Working sets. Now, they've done a ton of research and studies, so everything that's mentioned in podcast 1437 is all backed up by an infinite amount of studies. But the proper working sets per body part would be between 10 to 20 working sets a week. Now, how intense is a working set? A working set is a set of effort, a bout of effort, that has taken 1 to 2 reps shy of good form failure or right up to good form failure. So if you do a set of 10 and you just stop at 10 but you could have done 14, that is not a working set. If you stop at 10 and you're like, I don't know if I even could have gotten any more with decent technique, that's a working set. So you would look and say, okay, I want between 10 to 20 working sets per body part per week. Now, again, you can play within this range. If you have a body part that you want to catch up to the rest of your body parts, you would push that more towards the 15 to 20 range. If you have body parts that are okay developed and you have to kind of hold them still so the other ones can catch up, you might only train it 10 to 15 working sets per week. Now, there also is a little bit of complexity when it comes to indirect training. There's direct and indirect work, which I believe I just talked about in a recent podcast. Let me get back to kind of the first page of my podcast. I want to see if that one actually came out yet. Okay, so direct versus indirect work. Oh, okay, that's podcast 1478, so just a couple podcasts ago. I talked about the considerations you have when thinking of the working amount per week per body part. Is every time I'm doing a chest press or an overhead press, my triceps are involved. So my triceps are involved in indirect work. Every time I'm doing a back row, my biceps are involved in indirect work. So a back row is for your back, but your biceps still get worked. They might not be worked maximally, but they are worked to some degree. Now, that if you listen to that podcast, 1478, it talks about whenever I do programming for clients, I add up the direct working sets and the indirect working sets per muscle group, and I balance those out. So say somebody is like, well, I don't really care about growing my triceps. I want to build my chest. So all of a sudden they're doing 20 working sets a week of chest presses. Well, if they have a shorter upper arm, they're actually going to be stimulating their tricep more than they're stimulating their chest. So they're actually doing more tricep work than they would be doing their chest work. But if they have a longer upper arm, they're actually going to get more chest development. So a lot of anatomy comes into play, which is why I have a job, is because I can fine-tune and individualize programming for those components, those concepts. But that would be something to consider, is when you're looking at total working sets, you don't have to do, 10 to 20 isolation exercises just for your triceps. 10 to 20 isolation working sets. Your triceps are going to be involved anytime you do a chest press or an overhead press. So if you have chest presses and overhead presses in your program, you don't need as many isolative tricep-based working sets. But if you don't have a lot of chest presses, you maybe do a lot more flies because that helps your chest grow. Well, then you might need more direct tricep work since you're not getting the indirect work in the presses. Now, that's a little bit complicated, but I don't want to not mention it because it is something to consider. Now, if you're an ectomorph, I would encourage you to be the bottom end of the ranges. This is going to sound counterintuitive. Sometimes when people are ectomorphs, they think the more I do, the more I'll grow. It's actually the opposite. You want to do the least amount to create muscle damage and then try to out-eat that damage. the more you work out, the more you would have to eat. And that becomes the challenge is, can you even out-eat your caloric usage and the damage that you're creating? Most ectomorphs should train on the bottom end of the ranges. So still train, pick 1 or 2 body parts you want to grow the most, train them twice a week, train everything else once a week. Then make your working sets somewhere between 10 to 15 per body part, not 15 to 20. You can also play around with going heavier in your time under tension, so in your rep ranges. So they've done a ton of studies, and this is all backed up by studies, but between 20 to 40 seconds of time under tension is kind of the sweet spot for muscle damage, which then turns into muscle growth. So if I'm doing an exercise and I fail at around 20 to 30 seconds, that's considered heavy for bodybuilding, but that's the appropriate time under tension range for heavy-based work in bodybuilding. So sets of 10 to 12 is what you're doing right now. That might be too long. It might be too short. It kind of depends on how fast or how slow you move. Some people move very slow and they're very meticulous in lifting. So 10 reps might end up taking them 40 seconds. And if you're an ectomorph, you need to go a little bit heavier and shorten that time under tension. So you're going to start lifting a little bit heavier and go more towards the 20-second time under tension range. I would argue that you could even go down to like 15 to 30, somewhere in that range. So your working sets, you should reach good form failure or 1 or 2 reps shy of good form failure, somewhere between 15 to 30 seconds. That's going to be very specific for you, ectomorphs. The reason why is you want to put heavier weight load onto the tissues and really try to maximize the shear force damage that you get to create with heavier weight loads. So you're going to do the lower end of the volume components and the low end of the time under tension range. And then you're going to focus on food. You have got to eat a stupid amount of food. Podcast 1436 is a nutrition podcast titled 3 Tips for Greater Leanness and Muscularity. That would be a great one to listen to. You have to eat more. You have to eat enough that you actually weigh more. Okay? Ectomorphs. You want to try to gain 4 pounds a month. 4 pounds every 4 weeks. If you're averaging under 4 pounds gained per 4 weeks, you're not eating enough. Now that can feel insane because you're going to say, I'm eating, all day, I'm eating everything, blah, blah. I know. I've been there. So I have eaten to the point of I've literally thrown up before. Literally, I have thrown up from force feeding myself. So I do know how miserable it can be to eat to grow. 100% I'm aware of that. That's how I gained 120 pounds of lean muscle tissue since I graduated high school. I ate till I was ridiculously uncomfortable. The challenge is you then have to turn around and do it again. You have to eat all damn day. All day. So we have calorie recommendations where you might tell somebody, people should eat in general between body weight times 11 to 15. 11 to 13 might be enough to kind of lose weight or slowly maintain, improved body composition. 13 to 15 might be enough for people to gain some muscle size. Well, if you're eating body weight times 15 and your weight's not going up, it's not enough. I have clients right now that eat between body weight times 17 to body weight times 20. So I have people who eat 20 times their body weight in calories. That's crazy pants. I know. But it's what we needed to do for them to grow. Now, for them in order to digest that food, it's almost exclusively lean proteins and carbs because we have to get the food to digest fast enough that they can eat again. If you do high fats, you're not going to be hungry enough. The food's just going to take too damn long to digest and you're not going to be hungry. So you might have to go to high carb intake with protein intake and minimal fats. So that's going to be the big thing with ectomorphs. Let's go to the other end. Endomorphs. If you feel like, I'm kind of thicker build, I want to continue to kind of build muscle, but I don't want to just get fat. That is tough. That is very, very, very tough. So you actually want to do the complete opposite. You want to be on the high end of the ranges. Train as many of your body parts twice a week as you can. training the higher end of the working sets per body part per week, so that 15 to 20 range. And you want to train in the higher time under tension ranges, maybe like 30 to 60 seconds. You want to stay away from too heavy of weight. It's you're not going to need it for growth stimulus. You're still going to grow from the 30 to 60 second stuff, and the 30 to 60 second stuff helps burn up more calories overall in your training. So, if you're an endomorph, you're on the high end of the ranges. And then for nutrition, you want to be in a surplus so you can grow, but you have to be very mindful of distribution. What this means is your calories and protein, like when are you eating them throughout the day? You absolutely do need to minimize surpluses throughout the day. So it's better for you to eat more frequently and to spread your calories and protein evenly throughout the day. Try not to undereat during the day and overeat at night. So as an endomorph, you do the opposite. You do the high-end ranges of everything, and then you do need to be in a surplus to grow muscle tissue, but you want to distribute that out super duper freaking even and make sure you don't have little mini surpluses at any point in the day. Okay? Now, mesomorphs, yeah, you jerks. Anything you do is going to work. Just enjoy it. But if you are a mesomorph and you're like, I want to grow, but I don't want to limit my growth by worrying about body fat, but I don't also want to get too fat. I do understand that 100%. A lot of the athletes I work with they are mesomorphs, and what we have to do is basically just play that game where if they want to be growing, we do want to see weight improvement, so weight going up. So we are looking for 4 to 6 pounds per 4 weeks. If they start to feel washed out or flushed and they are gaining at that rate, we might slow it down to try to do 2 to 4 pounds over the next 4 weeks. If they're feeling, if they're hitting 4 to 6 and they're like, dude, I still feel really lean, I can see veins everywhere, we might push more towards 6 to 8. But it's just kind of seeing how your body's feeling and how your body's responding to what you're eating. Now, when you mention compound sets versus isolation sets, that's tricky in the sense that mesomorphs will benefit from a blend of them. Meaning they're going to do compound movements overall mostly, and then they're going to throw in a couple isolation movements for body parts that maybe aren't worked well in the compound movements. So for example, I have very short upper arms. A lot of my chest presses don't stimulate my chest 100%, they stimulate my triceps 100%. So I have to do more chest flies before and after my presses to make sure my chest gets worked as much as my triceps do. So with a shorter upper arm, I'm going to have to throw in isolations to account for the fact that my chest is underworked in presses. So same thing if you're looking at back. If I do back rows and pull-ups, since I have a shorter upper arm, my biceps don't really get a lot of work. So I have to do a lot more isolation work for my biceps at the end of my workouts. Then maybe somebody with longer arms, maybe their biceps are growing really well with rows and pull-ups and pull-downs, and they don't need as much isolative work for their biceps. So that's really going to be a matter of kind of individual body structure as to whether you need more compound or more isolation. But in general, you want to have a blend of them, but you don't really need to isolate the muscles that do well in compound movements. So for example, if you squat and you have really big quads, you probably don't need to do leg extensions. You might need to do more hamstring curls, maybe even some glute isolations like hip thrusts and stuff. But if your quads are already growing really well from squats, you don't need to isolate them. Same thing, if you do a lot of chest presses and your chest is very dominant, you don't probably need to do chest flies. So you really want to isolate the body parts that are lagging behind. And that would go for ectomorph, mesomorph, or endomorph. So, hopefully, that was pretty helpful. I encourage you to listen to some of the podcasts that I mentioned. I hope they would help as well. And if you have any follow-up questions, just shoot me an email. Well, you already know how, listener, because you already did. But to everybody else, our email is brutalironjim@gmail.com. So I hope these podcasts are helpful. I hope I give some good information. A lot of the components, when you get into the dirty details of things, they're very individualized. So I hope that I include, talking about limb lengths and how that's an important component, talking about indirect versus direct work and how that's an important component, talking about endomorphs, that's important. I hope it's not so detailed that it feels overwhelming or just lost in translation, meaning there's too many details to figure out what's best for you. I hope I present it well. If you have any follow-up questions or you want any clarity, just shoot me an email, brutalirongym@gmail.com. And then hopefully by the end of next week, I'll have the template written for this type of programming, which will be kind of power building, where you're trying to get stronger and bigger at the same time. We do have our $200 a month individual service, where I will literally write your training program and your nutrition program, check in with you every week, do video reviews, tons and tons of communication. You can ask any questions you want, and I answer them every single week. So we have that service for $200 a month. The idea of the templates are going to be, if somebody can't afford that, or they maybe start with that and then they want to go on their own, after you're done doing the $200 a month service, I would teach you how to use the templates so that way you can write your own workouts for the rest of your life. So that's the idea of it. And then also, over half of my current clients are trainers. So the really idea behind the templates was to teach my trainers how to write better programming based on individual goals, but they could still individualize it per client. So I wanted to give my trainer clients better quality information than what's out there in the world. So check that out on our website. It'll all be coming up this week and next week. Hopefully I'll get more and more up on there. But thank you for listening. I really appreciate everybody's support. It's super exciting to know someone's listening from Japan. That's freaking awesome. I do love Podbean. That's the site I use to host the podcast. It has like a map feature where I can see people from different parts of the world are listening. So I can see, what parts of Australia are listening, what parts of Sweden, Germany, Canada, all throughout the United States. And it's super fun to see people from all over the world listening. And I do hope that you're getting the quality of information that you want and you're getting your questions answered. So if there is anything that you would like to know, just shoot me an email like this person did, and I'll be happy to make you a podcast. Cool. Well, if you like our podcast, if you think it's helpful into your life, please consider sharing it into others. You can share it on social media, or you can share it in just a conversation. If somebody has a question about training or nutrition, tell them about the podcast, tell them to send in their question, and I'll answer it for free. Also, thank you to the people who donate to support the podcast. The podcast is well over $1,000 a year for hosting costs. I give an hour to it every day, and I want to keep it for free. So thank you to those who donate. You can do so at our website, www.brutalirongym.com. There's an option there for a one-time donation, monthly donation, yearly donation, even just $5 a month. It does add up. It does help. So thank you to those who do that. Also, if you like the information we share in our podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. And if you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything you want to know, let us know at our email, brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.